Good evening, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues of the bar. We are going to be starting in just a few minutes. We are waiting for members of the public and colleagues to settle in. And at this time, I would just introduce myself. I am your moderator for this evening, but I'm not alone. I'm here with a co-moderator. I am Anande Trotman Joseph, and with me is my colleague Sasha Courtney, and we will be taking you through this evening's program. We do invite you to come forward as best as you can towards the front of this hall, and we will be starting in just a few minutes, I would suggest. Program. My co-moderator, Sasha Courtney, and I, Nandi Trotman Joseph, we welcome you to this 20th Sir Archibald Nedd Memorial Lecture, which has been held consistently by the Grenada Bar Association. We do warmly recognize you all, and in particular, we recognize in our audience Senator the Honorable Dr. Decima Williams, President of the Senate of Grenada, Her Ladyship, Justice Agnes Acti. We have as well with us Her Honor, Chief Magistrate and other magistrates of our Magistrates Court. We recognize, of course, right here on our head table, our guest speaker, Dr. Spencer Thomas, no stranger to any of us, our own president of the Grenada Bar Association, Mr. Francis Paul, and of course, ably supported by his executive members of the Bar Association. We recognize in our audience our learned members of the inner and outer bar, and in particular, we recognize Sir Lawrence Joseph and King's Counsel, Mr. Ruggles Ferguson, and all of our colleagues, you friends of the Grenada Bar Association, viewers and listeners on our online platform this evening for this, our Sir Archibald Nedd Memorial Lecture. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, friends, brothers and sisters all. At this time, I will now hand over, having shared our protocol list, I will now hand over to the co-moderator.
Pleasant good night to all. If I may impose on everyone here, will everyone please stand for the opening prayer that will be delivered by Reverend Dr. Osbert James.
Let us pray. God, our Creator, when you brought our planet into existence, you said it was good. You entrusted us as stewards of all that you made in hope that we would care for and respect the created order. Forgive us, Lord, for we have used without replenishing, and we have ravaged and laid waste your creation. Creation is now in revolt as a direct result of our abuse. Lord, save us from ourselves. I pray that those who live in countries that consume much of the world's resources and emit the overwhelming majority of gases and industrial waste that harm our earth would acknowledge and accept the harm their carbon footprint has caused and would work to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases and also compensate those countries which are most affected, especially small island nations for whom climate change is a present existential threat. We pray that today's lecture will spur us to further individual and societal action to retard and mitigate against the inevitable impact of weather events on our way of life. We may this prayer in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you please remain standing for the national anthem, which will be sung by LaShawnia Harris.
Good evening, everyone. Hail, Grenada, land of ours, we pledge ourselves to thee. Heads, hearts, and hands in unity to reach our destiny. Ever conscious of God, being proud of our heritage. May we with faith and courage aspire, build, advance as one people, one family. God bless our nation. Thank you.
Please be seated, everyone. At this time, we will now have some remarks by our very own President of the Grenada Bar Association, our esteemed Mr. Francis K. Paul. Mr. President, sir, to the podium.
Thank you, Madam and Mr. Moderator. Please allow me to adopt the protocol so elegantly set by the moderators. Good evening to everyone. The Grenada Bar Association is delighted to welcome you to this landmark event, the 20th Sir Archibald Nedd Memorial Lecture. The Bar Association has distinguished itself as one of the more proactive bars, not only in the region, but in the Commonwealth, when it comes to public legal education. So it is not by chance that this lecture series, now in its 20th year, is the longest running public legal education series in the entire Commonwealth. So Archibald Nedd was a former Chief Justice of Grenada from 1979 to 1986 and served the legal profession with distinction. The distinguished lecture series in his honor was launched in 1996 and is the premier public education event organized annually by the bar, aimed generally at sensitizing the public on current issues of law. The topics for the past lectures were created based on the public quest for knowledge on current legal issues and the existing legal landscape. The goal of these lectures and other public education forums organized by the Grenada Bar Association is for the public to develop awareness, understanding, and knowledge of legal and other current issues, ultimately leading to the empowerment to manage and treat with those said issues in the communities. Now, at this point, the bar must take this opportunity to extend appreciation to Mr. Ruggles Ferguson Casey, former president of the Grenada Bar Association, the OECS Bar Association, and the Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bars Association, known as OGBA, for his sterling contribution to public legal education, particularly to this distinguished lecture series. The inaugural lecture was delivered by Dr. Joseph Archibald Casey, of blessed memory, then president of the OECS Bar Association, on the topic, Essentials for a West Indies Supreme Court. Now, for my research, including an exclusive interview several years ago with Mr. Ferguson Casey by one of the regional media houses, I learned that Dr. Archibald, presenting the lecture, identified certain prerequisites for establishing a regional court of appeal to win public confidence, maintain judicial independence, prevent political interference, and guarantee continued funding. Furthermore, and I quote from Mr. Ferguson's interview, referring to Dr. Archibald, he had highlighted the need for an independent regional judicial and legal services commission, free of political membership to appoint judges, independent funding for the court through a trust fund model, and relatively easy access to the court by the Caribbean people that it is intended to serve. The said lecture was an excellent guide to the establishment of the CCJ, Caribbean Court of Justice, which today reflects the vision of independence articulated by Dr. Archibald. It is therefore quite evident that the inaugural lecture was stimulating, informative, memorable, and instrumental in shaping our Caribbean jurisprudence. The other 18 lectures, predominantly on topics of law, were delivered by other distinguished and prominent guest speakers, including featured prime ministers, such as Dr. Kenny Anthony, the Honorable Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, Sir Owen Arthur of blessed memory, and the current Prime Minister of the Republic of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Motley. Also, several justices, including Sir Dennis Byron, former Chief Justice of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court and former President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, the Honorable Justice Adrian Sanders, former Acting Chief Justice of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court and President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, and the Honorable Dame Janice M. Pereira, former Chief Justice of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, who also delivered the lecture in 2022 on the topic Mob Justice versus Real Justice, Social Media and the Rule of Law. Last year, 2023, we were very fortunate to have the 19th lecture delivered by our very own Prime Minister, the Honorable Deacon Mitchell, on the topic Reparations, Republicanism, and the Rule of Law. What next after 50 years of independence? This thought-provoking and interactive lecture was well received by members of the public. This year's speaker is another son of the soil, Dr. Spencer Thomas, who will deliver on the topic Climate Change and the Environment. Will small island states survive? Now, I'm sure at this point you're whispering among yourselves and asking, from the historical account given and from maybe your attendances here at this lecture, is always on law. So why a non-legal topic, and consequentially, why a non-legal expert? So as indicated earlier, the topics of the lecture are chosen based on the public's quest for knowledge and the current landscape. Precedent has already been set in the past, since two non-legal experts have delivered the lectures, being Sir Owen Arthur of blessed memory and Mr. Reginald Dumas, also of blessed memory, of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. In deciding on a topic this year, the executive noted the effects of climate change, weakness in the form of prolonged dry conditions, the rise in the daily temperature in Grenada, and the passing of Hurricane Beryl on 1st July 2024, and its devastating aftermath seen in the northern part of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. We also noted with concern that Hurricane Beryl, the strongest Atlantic hurricane ever recorded in the month of July, strengthened very quickly due to the warm ocean temperature in the Atlantic Ocean. It really dawned on us that the effects of climate change are real, and it's definitely not climate as usual. The public was therefore clamoring for answers after the passage of Hurricane Beryl, and the cries became deafening due to the flooding that we experienced over the last 2 weeks, which have damaged vehicles, infrastructure, particularly road and water mains, and tragically claimed the life of a young lady. We therefore decided to focus on public education and formulated a topic that we found to be quite apt, given the current landscape. Our guest presenter today was also carefully considered. He has over 25 years of experience in international diplomacy in the areas of climate change, biodiversity, and sustainable development. He is a key advocate on issues relating to small island developing states within the context of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Further, he has just returned from Baku, Azerbaijan, having attended the Conference of Parties, which is COP29, which is a United Nations conference that brings global leaders and private sector leaders together to discuss climate action, energy transition, etc. Time is running out to combat the effects of climate change. We look forward to a stimulating and thought-provoking presentation, and we hope, like the first lecture, which assisted in shaping our Caribbean jurisprudence and landscape, this lecture will in the future assist in shaping the policies and climate action that we take as small island states to ensure that we survive and combat the effects of climate change on the environment. Before I conclude, however, it would be remiss of me if I don't assure the public that the Grenada Bar Association will continue to discharge its duties by providing public education on legal issues and current legislation. There has been significant improvement in the access to justice and the delivery thereof in Grenada over the last few years, due in part to the technological advances which have been embraced by the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court and is evident particularly through the lens of the e-litigation portal. However, there are still deficiencies in our legal system and access to justice, including inadequate resources, particularly at the Supreme Court Registry, and legislation that needs to be revised and or amended remains an issue. The Possessory Title Act immediately comes to mind, which is being relied on many applicants who legitimately come before the court to obtain title to land on the ground of continuous and undisturbed possession for over 12 years. Now, also for applicants who claim that the paper title is irreparably defective and are of little or no use commercially, I want to repudiate same to rely on the Possessory Title Act. The judgment delivered by the High Court on the 21st of August 2024 have significantly affected such applicants. Appeals have since been filed by the applicants in the said judgments and are now before the Court of Appeal to review the judgment and give a decision. Today, the bar was invited to make certain submissions to assist the Court of Appeal in its deliberation. I therefore want to reassure you that the bar is not silent in these matters and will continue to be the vanguard for the public. Once again, I welcome you for making the decision to be part of this evening event, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Indeed, we are hearing that you are setting the scene for this lecture about climate change and the environment. Will small island states survive? And of course, sharing with us some of the advocacy and practical work that the Grenada Bar Association is doing in ensuring that it's doing their part for a better Grenada. At this time, I invite to the podium my co-moderator, Sasha Courtney, and he will be sharing a biography of the inspiration, the person who inspired this particular lecture, Sir Archibald Nedd. And even as I invite him, I ask us to recognize a living icon among our audience here this evening, and that is King's Counsel Ruggles Ferguson, whose idea it was to have this series in the first place. And a little known fact here is that this model, which was put to the Grenada Bar, has been put to the OECS and the wider Caribbean, and there are now similar lectures being held by the bar associations across the Caribbean region, all the brainchild of our own King's Counsel, Ruggles Ferguson. Sasha?
Again, good night to everyone. Naturally, I will adopt the protocol already established. Before I present this biography, I wanted to share something a bit embarrassing, but it is fitting. For the first time today, I digested in earnest the biography of Sir Archibald Nedd. And I must say, at the end of that process, I formed the opinion that he was quite an impressive gentleman. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with him, I'm pretty sure that at the end of my presentation, you will come to that same conclusion. Allow me to begin. Sir Archibald Nedd was born on August 8, 1916 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He attended primary and secondary school in Grenada and was Grenada's 1934 Island Scholar. He then proceeded to King's College in London, where he graduated with a Bachelor's of Law degree in 1938. In November that year, he was called to the bar by the Honorable Society of the Inner Temple. During his legal career, Sir Archibald served in several countries in several legal capacities. He returned to Grenada in 1939 and entered private practice until 1940, where he was appointed Registrar of the High Court and Additional Magistrate in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. From 1941 to 1943, he served in a similar capacity, Registrar and Additional Magistrate, in Dominica. And from 1943 to 1944, was Magistrate in St. Lucia, where he also acted as Attorney General, a position that was then called, I'm told, Crown Attorney. During the period 1944 to 1949, Sir Archibald worked in Dominica as Crown Attorney. In 1949, he took the decision to go to Africa and remained in Nigeria for the next 25 years. First, for a 4-year period, 1949 to 1953, in the service of the government of Nigeria as magistrate with full powers, and then from 1953 to 1970, where he was engaged in private practice in that country. He then returned to the Nigerian government, the employ, for the next 4 years until 1974, serving in the capacity as State Counsel and legal draftsman. In 1974, Sir Archibald returned to the Caribbean and was appointed puisne judge of the OECS Supreme Court and was posted to Antigua, where he served for 1 year, after which he was transferred to his native Grenada, where he served from 1975 until 1979. Then came the well-known events in Grenada in the year 1979, and following the removal of Grenada from the OECS Supreme Court, Sir Archibald was offered by the then government, and he accepted, the position of Chief Justice of the New Grenada Court at the time. He served in that capacity until 1986, when he retired. In 1984, he was knighted by Her Majesty the Queen. Sir Archibald passed away on the 20th of June, 1992, after a long illness at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Barbados. The Sir Archibald Nedd Lecture Series was launched in his memory by the Grenada Bar Association in July 1996, and as was just indicated by my co-moderator, I believe our very own Mr. Ruggles Ferguson, King's Counsel, was instrumental in implementing that. Lastly, but certainly not least, the Sir Archibald Nedd Law Library was also named after him. Ladies and gentlemen, a legal luminary, clearly, Sir Archibald Nedd. Now at this time, allow me to invite Ms. Rosanna John Mitchell to the podium as she delivers the introduction of our featured speaker.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It is my distinct pleasure to provide some background on our speaker tonight. Dr. Spencer Thomas has over 25 years of experience in international diplomacy in areas of climate change, biodiversity, and sustainable development. He was appointed as Grenada's ambassador and special envoy for multilateral environmental agreements in 2008, and the country's lead negotiator for climate change and biodiversity. Dr. Thomas is a key advocate on issues relating to small island developing states within the context of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and other biodiversity-related conventions. the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Dr. Thomas is a former chairman of the advisory board of the Climate Technology Center and network under the UN Climate Change Convention, and has served as coordinator of the Alliance of Small Island States from 2007 to 2012, when Grenada held the chairmanship of that body. Dr. Thomas was a member of the Bureau of the Subsidiary Body for Scientific, Technical, and Technological Advice from the UN Convention on Biological Diversity for the period 2005 to 2010, and served as chairman of that body from 2008 to 2010. Subsequently, he served on the Bureau of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity as a vice president representing Latin America and the Caribbean from 2010 to 2014, and was chairman of the Budget Contact Group from 2010 to 2024. He also represented Latin America and the Caribbean as a chairman on the Bureau of the Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and has chaired the Budget and Finance Committee on the platform from 2013 to 2019. He served on the Council and Bureau of the IUCN as a regional counselor representing North America and the Caribbean, and chaired the Finance and Audit Committee for the period 2008 to 2016. Dr. Thomas is currently a member of the Executive Board of the Clean Development Mechanism of the United Nations Climate Change Convention, and served as chairman of that body in 2022. He is currently the chairman of the accreditation panel of the Clean Development Mechanism. He is also currently a member of the board of the Global Island Partnership and the Local 2030 Islands Network. As a former permanent secretary and economic policy advisor in the Ministry of Finance, Dr. Thomas is fully immersed in finance and development policy issues. He was a long-standing chairman of the National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission, the Public Utilities Regulatory Commission, and the Sustainable Development Council. Dr. Thomas holds a doctorate in energy economics from Howard University, Master of Science degree in Development Economics from Iowa State University of Science and Technology, a Bachelor of Arts degree in Mathematical Economics from Howard University, a diploma in economics from Temple University, and a postdoctoral master's degree in telecommunications regulation and policy from the University of the West Indies. I think we would all agree that he is very qualified to deliver tonight's lecture.
Thank you and good evening to everyone. Thank you, Ms. Mitchell, for your kind introduction. And let me say thank you to the President and the members of the Grenada Bar Association for your kind invitation to be associated in a small way with the Sir Archibald Nedd Memorial Lecture Series. I fully subscribe to the protocol already established, but permit me to recognize the presence of Dr. Decima Williams, the President of the Senate, who has been in the trenches, the climate trenches, for many years, together with some of us in this room. I think I saw Leon Charles and Trevor Thompson, so I'd like to recognize them. And also, I would like to recognize Casey Ruggles Ferguson, who maneuvered me here on the stage here tonight. Definitely maneuvered me. I will say that I filled him in one way, and then the result is that I'm here. So thank you very much for your invitation. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed an honor for me to be invited to speak at this August forum and on the special occasion of the 20th anniversary. I understand that typically invitations are extended to legal luminaries, and that this is only the third time that an invitation is extended outside of that frame, both times in the past to persons from the economics discipline, the discipline we call the dismal science. The first time around, I think it was, I understand, it's Reginald Dumas, and then we had Prime Minister Owen Otter, or maybe the other way around. I also understand that Prime Ministers Mia Mottley and Ralph Gonsalves have been here on this podium, also Prime Minister Kenny Anthony. And last year, we had Prime Minister Dick Mitchell. I must admit that following these prime ministers on this stage caused me some serious trepidations. But I quickly composed myself in the realization that the path that they went through is not available for me. That I'm merely here to offer my own perspectives on the topic climate change and the environment. Can small island states survive? A most appropriate topic given the current geopolitical environment, and more so coming after the just concluded UN conference in Azerbaijan, Baku, Azerbaijan. The output of the 29th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, which we call COP29, in Baku was most memorable. What I call the Trump 2 phenomenon definitely loomed and overshadowed the conference. The Trump 2 phenomenon. I guess many of us will know what that means. The president of the bar, of the Grenada Bar Association, reminded me that this is a public lecture, and to avoid technical complexities, I will so oblige and refrain from the technical stuff in the 45 minutes allocated. I will focus on 5 elements in the context of the topic of small island states and its survival to the climate problem. And then I will offer some concluding perspectives. The 5 elements are: 1, the perspectives on COP29 and the outcome of COP29, the science and the politics of climate change, and what we notice is the politics is always in front of the science, and the science is relegated. I will also speak on the issue of the concept of loss and damage, which I think is quite important to the topic, and to speak again on some issues relating to the climate change negotiation and the dynamics of those negotiations, and then to offer some perspectives at the end on the issue of can small island states survive. Element 1, COP29 outcome. In Baku Stadium, the COP was determined and defined as a climate finance COP. Many recalculated this and say it's an ABC COP, all but climate finance. This was basically what it meant at the end of the day. A pertinent conclusion, though, to be drawn from COP29 is that the more things change, the more they remain the same. I'm taking it easy, as you said. No complexity here. COP29 began with a cloud of smoke from fossil fuel influence. A cloud of smoke from fossil fuel influence. 65,000 registered participants. What that includes about 2,000 senior fossil fuel executives. Over 2,000 fossil fuel executives. We started the conference 24 hours late because we could not agree on the agenda and a key aspect of that, fossil fuel. There was also diplomatic spat between the host country and some of the European countries, which also overshadowed the conference. Generally, throughout the conference, there was absence of climate ambition in many of the negotiated documents, and this facilitated a walkout from the conference by small island developing states and LDCs when they claim that their voice was not heard and they are excluded from certain decision-making space. So, in other words, the COP came to a situation where it could have collapsed on several occasions during that period. When the final gavel fell, 35 hours beyond the point in which it was supposed to be, there is an issue which everyone and many in the group said the president basically did a shorthanded by gaveling without ensuring that everyone is okay. And so that was one of the issues also. So several countries queried the outcome on the grounds of process and content. And we hear issues like it's on stage managed, unfortunate incident, it is an optical illusion, it's not what you see, it's not what is there. And then we heard a lot of issues really that the COP was really a failure. And some say that it was a disaster. And then you will hear others will say, well, it's not so bad, we could work with it. But that's a minority, and those are mainly from the developed world. In short, the remarkable outcome, which I spoke about, of COP29, does not reflect the imperatives and the urgency for climate action. The stark reality is, at the end of the long session, we had a situation where take it or leave it. Take it or leave it. If you leave it, it's a completely collapse situation. If you take it, maybe you could fight another year, next year. And again, the take it was what came out of the conference. So in a nutshell, this is COP29. We have an agreement, and again, I think next year, we will try to decide what this agreement is all about. And secondly, the second point is the science and the politics. It is a well-established fact that climate change is real, and the impacts are global, evidenced by increased temperatures, heat for so, wildfires all over the place, rising sea levels, hurricanes, droughts, flooding, acidification of the oceans, coral bleaching, etc., down the road. And we can reach here only in Grenada. Let's look at Grenada. For this year, 11 months, we had a significant drought in the first portion of the year, almost five months. We had the hurricane on the 1st of July, first time, hurricane in the Atlantic, category 5 in June, and making landfall in July. And then in the last couple of weeks, significant flooding several times. So for this year alone, significant impacts on Grenada. But that's not only Grenada, this is throughout the Caribbean, throughout the world. We heard what happened in Spain, we see what's happening in New York, and up the East Coast and all over the place. So the issue of climate damage is clear. The UN Secretary General called it a masterclass in human destruction. The science of climate change is clear to the great majority. 2023 was the hottest year on record, and it is virtually certain that 2024 will be the hottest year on record. It is well established that small island developing states are on the front lines of devastating climate actions. There are the canaries in the mines. This is well established. The terminology, which we heard already, existential threat, relates directly to small island developing states. Throughout the UN processes, small island developing states have secured the designation of unique vulnerability to climate change with special needs and circumstances. Uniquely vulnerable by virtue of geography, we're located in the tropics, the frequency and extent of the devastating impacts. When the hurricanes pass, 200% of gross domestic product will be lost in a very short order. That against the bigger countries where, while they might have more damage, there will be less portion of their gross domestic product. Special needs and circumstances by virtue of the capacity to respond, to adapt, and to build resilient economies. And here we're speaking about environmental resilience, social resilience, economic and cultural resilience. The call from the science for urgent and ambitious climate mitigation and adaptation action was generally generally unheeded. Will small island states survive? The call from the science was clear, unambiguous, incontestable, but the science is challenged by the climate deniers. Within that context, we ask the question, will small island states survive? Many small island states ask the question whether the global community will let them die and the leaders will not wake up for action. But it is clear, however, that you cannot wake someone who is pretending to sleep. He's already awake. You cannot easily jolt someone who stubbornly defends particular interests. You can ask him to change course because he's defending particular interests, the fossil fuel interests. Unlike the global community, seeds have long recognized there are 3 pillars for climate action. Mitigation, generally to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Adaptation, to cope with the impacts and to build resilience. And importantly, loss and damage, to respond to irreversible impacts, breaches in the tipping points, loss of lives and livelihoods, species extinction, and ecosystem degradation. So that brings me to the third element, loss and damage. Some 32 years ago, small island developing states advanced the concept of loss and damage in the climate change negotiations, a topic which I think will resonate quite well into this legal space. The issue of insurance after a major catastrophe was the primary concern then when they put forward this issue of loss and damage. The concept, however, of loss and damage has evolved. The concept of loss and damage is not limited to impacts of rapid onset extreme weather events like storms, hurricanes, and flash flooding. It's not. And then the cost of that relating to relief, reconstruction, and rehabilitation. The concept of loss and damage includes the impact of slow onset events like rising sea levels, ocean acidification, sargassum bloom, coral bleaching, saline intrusion in the aquifer, soil degradation, biodiversity loss, and reduced agricultural productivity. So that's we're talking about survival of small island states. The concept, therefore, includes the impact of rapid and slow onset events, including economic and non-economic losses. The concept of loss and damage, therefore, includes indirect effects, including debt burden, the drop in economic productivity and output, Thank you. The concept of loss and damage must therefore include indirect effects of increasing debt burden, the drop in economic productivity and output, and the social costs, quite importantly, the social costs, including migration, the loss of lives and livelihoods. It took over 30 years for a fund for responding to loss and damage, as called for by SEEDS, to be established. It was only established in Egypt at COP27 2 years ago. Why? The elephant in the room was the issue of liability and compensation. And that elephant is still in the room. This is basically akin to the debate that we had on reparations that is currently ongoing. And of course, I know that was dealt with thoroughly at last year's issues. But a bigger elephant in the room, as far as I'm concerned, is the issue of climate justice and the issue of resources to deal with the issue of climate justice. I will then move to the fourth element, which is what happens in the negotiation, the dynamics of the negotiation. And for this, let me circle to the adage, back to that same adage, that the more things change, the more they remain the same, by taking you back to the year 1859, at the birth of the science of climate change. In the seminal article entitled On the Influence of Carbonic Acid in the Air upon the Temperature on the Ground, Irish physicist John Tyndall found that carbon dioxide absorbed heat, and the variations in the composition of the atmosphere could create changes in the climate. That was 1859. The point was that carbon dioxide has something to do with the change in climate. That was known since 1859. This was the beginning of the great debate between and among the science of climate change, the economics of climate change, and the politics of climate change. In 1896, Swedish economist Svante Henius found that combustion of coal and petroleum could raise global temperatures. So these two seminal articles basically indicated the issue relating to climate change in a very early age. The debate intensified. The debate intensified on the nature, the extent, and the impact of climate change. Many will recall that there was also a very active debate on smoking and the use of tobacco and cigarettes in those around that same time. And again, the issue was money. Money talk, economics and politics were the victors, and science was relegated to the heap. It took over 100 years since Tyndall for the global community to establish an international scientific body to assess the science of climate change. It took over 100 years. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was established in 1988 to provide assessment of the science, and that was a small victory for the science. It took over 100 years. 4 years later, 1992, the 3 Rio Conventions were signed on climate change, on biodiversity, and on land degradation. Another small victory for the science and the environment. You notice that within the 3 Rio Conventions, it seems as though that the Climate Change Convention had a special place. It is the United Nations Framework Convention, whereas it is the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity and Convention to combat desertification. There is no framework in there. I understand that there is a legal issue in terms of the word framework in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This was signed, I said, in 1992, ratified and entered into force in 1994. Of course, Grenada also signed the convention in 1994. The express purpose is geared to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations at levels that will prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. Critically, the convention embodied several principles, that of equity, and this is the critical issues, equity and fairness, the right to sustainable development, historical responsibility, very critical, historical responsibility. These are enshrined in the convention. Common but differentiated responsibility and respective capacity. We have a common responsibility, but it's differentiated. And at that time, it was differentiated between developed and developing countries. Also, we have the issue relating to the precautionary approach. It's again embedded in the convention. The polluter pay principle is also embedded in the convention. And of course, the leadership issue, that the leadership on climate action must be taken by developed countries and they must pay for it. All that is within the context of the convention. And also part of the Paris Agreement, which is a protocol to the convention. So in other words, the basis of climate justice is already incorporated into the convention and the Paris Agreement, in my view. Today, we have 198 countries are parties to the convention, and we had 29 conference of the parties to date. The outcomes of these parties are given some very sexy names, like the Bali Action Plan. But you ask the question, where is the action? We had the Copenhagen Accord, but that seems like more the Copenhagen Discord, because many didn't agree with the Copenhagen Accord. I think Dr. Decima Williams will bear me out on that. We had the Durban Platform. We had the Doha Gateway and the Paris Agreement. All these, again, nice names. We had the Glasgow Pact, and we had the UAE Consensus. Again, all of these indicating that we are making progress and we're doing really well in the climate work. At COP29, there was no consensus on what we call the UAE Consensus. At COP29, we couldn't agree on what we meant by the UAE Consensus. So we had to pack it for the future COP. And that's the reason, the circular arguments within the process. COP29 is dubbed the Baku Climate Unity Pact. Climate unity. And I've already indicated to you that many are saying that this is a failure and at worst a disaster. But yet, it is dubbed the Baku Climate Unity Pact. So we ask the question, what has changed? Yes, much has changed, but much has remained the same. Today, we talk about a new normal due to climate change, new normal. We talk about unprecedented phenomena throughout the globe, records of all kinds, in all spheres, in heat, in fires, in floods, in coral bleaching, in hurricanes, in cyclones, records all over the place. Yet the geopolitics of climate change remains supreme, while the science of climate change is being denied and relegated. Big money, of course, big money continues to talk. Billions of dollars raked in annually by the fossil fuel companies. Billions of dollars. The numbers are clear, I don't have to go through the numbers. Billions in debt are mounting for the most vulnerable small island states. Today, we have trillions of dollars to the war efforts in Ukraine and Gaza, trillions of dollars in fossil fuel subsidies via tax breaks, guarantees, direct investments. But we have pocket change to address climate change and biodiversity and other very important environmental conventions. And it's pocket change pledges. Pledges. I want to focus on the word pledges. Last, the biodiversity conference held a couple of weeks ago in Colombia stalled. It wasn't completed because of the issue of finance. Right now, I think the CCD COP is going on, and I believe we might solve the same fate. We have the IMO, who are doing a lot of work on shipping, because shipping is a hard sector. They're looking at some levies there. We don't know what will happen, but we believe that the same kind of circular arguments will forbid all over on these issues. The shift to the extreme right following recent elections in big emitting countries exacerbate the problem that we have. And we have seen some definitive shifts in Europe already, and maybe even in Germany, we might find Canada, when we know what happened in the US. And clearly, these shifts are very clearly will not be in line with environmental stewardship. Geopolitics between the two major economies. We call them the G2, China and the USA. That again will be overpowering the climate negotiations and environmental negotiations. Trade wars. They have trade wars between those two countries. They also have technology wars, very critical. The same technologies that are we using to address the climate change issues and the environmental issues will also be part of these global issues. And as indicated, petroleum lobby is pervasive. The new nominee for the U.S. Energy Secretary is a premier climate denier. And this has energized what we call the Trump 2 phenomena, has energized the right and has energized the climate deniers. Trump 2 phenomena is in full effect. So what do we mean by Trump 2 phenomenon? Climate change is non-existent. Climate change is an expensive hoax, a myth. Drill, baby, drill. Fossil fuel is liquid gold. The rollback of the domestic climate regulations, the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States under serious attack will be, of course. The US might pull out of the Paris Agreement and maybe even the convention. And of course, they will not be paying any monies in the Trump 2 phenomenon space. So that is what Trump 2 phenomenon is. And that is what is overplaying a lot of the issues that we have as we move forward. The Trump 2 phenomenon. The COP29 negotiators, and indeed the negotiation over the years, what has happened? It has been characterized by a race to the bottom, like a least common denominator approach. This is clear, and it will get worse as we go forward with those rightist governments all over the world. Several hours of negotiating time have spent on whether the terminology should be should or shall. You could spend many, many hours to unravel this, whether it will be in particular or whether it's such as, whether it is requests or invites, whether it encourages, whether it agrees, whether it affirms. And we could spend countless hours just to agree on which of those will be appropriate. And sometimes we have a difficulty to find out where is the best place to put the comma so that you understand what we're saying. And we could spend hours on that also in the climate negotiation. It happens, and it happens all the time. But all of this could be geared to the bottom level of ambition and implementation. And most importantly, we agree with something this year, and we reinterpret it next year. And we continue to reinterpret and to reinterpret as we go along. And there is an issue we call conspicuous ambiguities. To get a consensus and to get people to agree, you find the language that everybody could feel that they win. And then the next year, you decide what you meant by what we have done in the language. This is what we call constructive ambiguities. And it happens all the time. So it is clear that in the negotiation, only incremental progress have been made. One I will always call as a significant one was the establishment of the Fund for Loss and Damage. Of course, that was established. A paltry sum of $700 million is in there. The jury is out. Let's see how much. And again, we have pledges. We have pledges. We have to find the money. We have to find the money. It's located. Once it's located into a particular institution, we have to get it out of that institution and then access modalities and so on. So there is a whole set. So making the pledge or making the goal, as we have just done in Baku, is just the first step. Because you have a finance goal, fine. It's not the right goal for many, but it's a goal. Then you have to have the pledges. Then you have to get the money. You put the money in an institution, and then you have to get it out. And then all the modalities to get it out, again, will have to be then dealt with. So this is just the case of it. So, in terms of the key priorities of small island states in COP, on finance, on mitigation and adaptation, on loss and damage, and climate justice and just transition, that was generally ignored, remained largely ignored at the COP. The unique vulnerability and special circumstances and special needs of seeds were under attack. Even at the Seeds 4 meeting in Antigua, that was also under attack there. The existential threat of small island developing states remains as the global community does not move to have the global temperatures on track to not exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. We are on a track to 3 degrees Celsius. So the issue of survivability of small island developing states is also in question. So we can ask the question, can small island states survive? Let me borrow two concepts from the dismal economics, the dismal science of economics. The tragedy of the commons, conceptualized by William Lloyd in 1833, and the concept of the wicked problem, introduced by West Chessman in 1967. Climate change can be viewed as a common resource, an economic and environmental science problem in which space individuals act and states act in their own interests at the expense of society, and ultimately reducing the options for others. So, give me a moment to vulgarize the tragedy of the commons for a moment. In the negotiations, climate change is a public good for the people and for the planet. Stabilization of greenhouse gases, good for the people and the planet, and for prosperity and for peace, as indicated in the SDGs. Investment in clean energy is good for everyone, of course. Here comes the Trump 2 effect, which of course is bad for the planet, yet individuals voted overwhelmingly for the phenomena solely based on private interests, individual selfish motives, while knowing that the rest of us will pay for it. The tragedy. The fossil fuel lobby during COP29 was particularly evident, as was the case in the UAE, in Egypt, and in Scotland, the locations of the last 3 major conferences. This is not expected to change as the conference moves to Brazil and then on to either Australia or Turkey in 2026. As noted earlier, registered oil lobbyists was prevalent all over those COPs. The media had it that senior officials from the host country were actively lobbying for fossil fuel contracts during the conference. I think I see Moses around here. He sent me a note and saying, "What are we doing about this man?" I said, "What can I do about this man?" The president of the country, the host country, said publicly that fossil fuel is a gift from God. Fossil fuel is a gift from God, publicly. So the question is, what can small states do to survive? What can small states do to survive? And I know we'll come to this because we heard a lot of issues relating to oil and gas production. We know the situation with Trinidad and Tobago, long history of involvement in the fossil fuel industry. Of course, Guyana, Suriname, Barbados with natural gas, and Grenada. Let's not forget that. We heard clearly, fossil fuel production and use is at the heart of climate crisis faced. Fossil fuel production and use is at the heart of the crisis that we face. This is clearly evident. Increasing accumulation of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is the overwhelming driver of the crisis. That's the issue. Small island developing states are therefore faced with the economic concept of a wicked problem as efforts to solve one sustainable development issue creates other problems due to complex interdependencies. So that's where the economists call the wicked problem. It's very difficult to solve some problems as a result of competing goals that you're trying to achieve. Algo, in the 2006 documentary, called it Inconvenient Truth. Many, many small states, including in the Caribbean, are actively looking to exploit oil and gas while calling for the global phase-out of fossil fuel. And I want to say that again. Many small states, small island states, throughout the world, including the Caribbean, they are calling for the phase-out of fossil fuel. At the same time, they are going to be dabbling in the oil and gas industry. The question is this a contradiction? Small island states are on the front lines of devastating climate impacts, and they seek to address the issues. Should they not seek to address the issues of climate justice, just transition, equity and sustainable development, including the energy security, fiscal balance through the exploitation of fossil fuel? That's the question. I mentioned earlier on the issues of the principles in the convention. So the question is, should small states in the front lines of devastating climate impacts seek to address the issues of climate justice, just transition, equity and sustainable development, including energy security and fiscal balance through the exploitation of fossil fuel? Prime Minister Mia Mottley dubbed this a difficult conversation. Many argue that accounts must be taken in small island states' decision-making space of the unjustness in the global economic system. Unjust global economic system. It is instructive to note that the purpose and objectives of the framework, Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement have been located in the context of sustainable development and the eradication of poverty. So that is the base of the Climate Convention and also the Paris Agreement. So there is a direct link to what we are doing in climate change with respect to sustainable development and the eradication of poverty. Also, that climate change is just one of 17 interrelated and intertwined sustainable development goals. So here we have, that's why it is called a wicked problem. You need to address all of the 17 sustainable development goals, and some of them, the solution package for one may not necessarily advance the objectives of others. A wicked problem indeed. At the same time, many big emitters, many historical emitters are actively pursuing expanding production of coal, oil, and gas in Baku, in the US, drill, baby, drill, in Canada, in Russia, in the UK. So the question is, what should small island states do in that situation? Many talk about the issue of having a carbon budget and dicing it up to make sure that small island states get some part of it. I don't know. The UN GRAP report said that many of these large countries will be expanding production, which will be 110% more than what is compatible to the safe limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius. That was set in the Paris Agreement. And that seeds have to defend very clearly. These countries have obligations to limit greenhouse gases via the convention, where it states that parties should take precautionary measures to anticipate, prevent, and minimize the causes of climate change and mitigate its impact. In the Paris Agreement, again, parties are agreed to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees and to pursue efforts at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Many will ask, what is the target? Is it 2 degrees or 1.5? Because you need, the language, as indicated earlier, to limit global warming well below 2 degrees and to pursue efforts to ensure that it does not go beyond 1.5. So for us, in small island developing states, we interpret this to be the limit to be 1.5. Many others have other issues. The international obligation ought to be translated into domestic legislation. And this is why we are here in this forum, to look at what will be how those international obligations as states translate into domestic legislation. To me, the growing disenchantment of non-state actors and the actions taken to address the climate crisis is growing across the globe, and a plethora of legal challenges in domestic and international courts. We're seeing that all over the world now. Children are taking the governments to court for not doing enough for climate change. Recently, the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, ICLOS, issued an advisory opinion on climate change and found that greenhouse gas emissions in the marine environment constitutes pollution with serious effects, directly and indirectly, and that states have an obligation to take necessary steps to prevent, reduce, and control pollution from greenhouse gas. This is recent from the ICLOS. The search for advisory opinions on obligations of states with respect to climate change and human rights are currently in oral submission stage before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the International Court of Justice. And I also heard that we also have cases in front of our own International Caribbean Court of Justice on the issue of climate. A new international plastics pollution treaty is currently being elaborated, thus making a case for a treaty on fossil fuel production and use. But we believe that this will be a pie in the sky with the current environmental and the current global issues in the environment at the moment. So let me conclude by advancing a couple issues here. The legal fraternity may have a role to play to facilitate ambitious climate and engender change. The legal fraternity must have a role, in my view. The climate change negotiations, principally the purview of meteorologists and other natural scientists, is now multidisciplinary in nature, with lawyers and policymakers among the principals. The development in international law through advisory opinions and the plethora of court cases can provide precedents in other jurisdictions with implications for domestic legislation. And enhanced understanding of climate change, its impacts, consequences, and projections will be an imperative for the legal profession. We believe also that capacity, enhanced capacity, especially in areas like attribution science, risk modeling, and climate planning, can be a major asset. Also, there is a prominent view that given the history of the conferences so far, that many wonder whether small island states should continue to be engaged in the process. Why are we, as small island states, continuing to engage in the process? And we believe, in my view, small island states, have to be on the negotiation table to articulate and argue and literally fight for their interests and their priorities. It is important in that view. I subscribe to the saying that if you are not on the table, then you are on the menu. You will be eaten for dinner. So small island states need to be there to articulate and to argue and to fight for their interests. I will also argue that given the global political landscape, the nature of climate change negotiations, the assault on the multilateral process, and the growing frustration of non-state actors, the international and domestic courts will be the next dominant platform for fights for climate justice. The next dominant platform will be the international courts for climate justice. Small states will have to intensify the fight for survival on all fronts. If the global community merely pretends to act on climate change, the climate will not notice that. So the devastation on small states will continue. So small states must continue the fight, buoyed by the science which states that it is technically and economically feasible to limit global temperatures to levels that may ensure their survival. And I will stop by indicating and borrowing a line from the tourism. And I hope that this talk can indicate that climate change is everybody's business. I thank you.
Audience, I think we can do a little better than that. This may not be the sexiest of topics that even we as a bar association would have had, or as one of our public lectures here in Grenada. But perhaps, as we have asked, will small island states survive? Can we survive this? We have heard from, you may not have known this before this evening, but we have heard from a global climate expert, one of our very own. And in this room, he has named some who have joined him in the trenches of climate action and that fight for advocacy in that area. And he, of course, recognized his colleagues in that fight, Honorable Dr. Decima Williams and Mr. Leon Charles, who would have given much of their recent life to this particular fight. And yes, it's a fight. And we have heard in this short presentation that he has just come back from COP29. He has brought the global, the world stage uniquely to us here this evening so that we can get a sense of what is happening when we would have heard him sharing a word picture of what is happening that causes us to live through the hurricanes and the floods, and to ask and interrogate the question, is this a climate myth? Is this an optical illusion? He has tapped and pointed out to us the role of the geopolitics, the role of big fossil fuel, and the climate change science that should be first is being put last. We here know what we live. So, with that in mind, I would hand over to my co-moderator, Sasha, as we contemplate the real loss and damage of Ivan, Emily, and more recently, Beryl, and the floods that we have been experiencing. Sasha.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. At this time, we will be having an interactive session, and this is how we propose to do it. There are 2 microphones on either aisle. Those of you who wish to pose a question to the good doctor, you're invited to approach your nearest microphone, state your name and organization, or both, and you pose your question. We now invite the audience.
Good evening to all, and let me maybe try to start the ball rolling. I'm Michael Jessamy. Well, no organization, I'm retired. I'm not like Dr. Spence, who has been using some renewable energy. So when you look at him, you see a man maybe in his 40s, but we know he has been out there. Let me congratulate the Bar Association for having lectures like these. Yes, it's educational, but it is also legal as well, too. And I trust that, in the end, the message can resonate throughout the state. I have really 2 simple questions, and one is, where do we go from here? And the other is, how can we get our experts like Dr. Spence, Dr. Decima? We have ambassadors to the ocean. We have people like Martin Barreto. We have Trevor. How can we, as a nation, try to do something in Grenada that maybe might resonate internationally, and then maybe it could also serve as a catalyst. Dr. Spence used some historical evidence, which I wanted to stay away from, but we have been speaking about the floods in River Road, and many other areas, and some of the landslips and slides are really man-made. Today, we see a lot of pipelines, and so, from houses, we have gray water, we have sewer, and so being dumped right on our public roads. If we're talking about ocean warming, and so, these are things that we need to look at. When we look at River Road, the people who lived there around 300 AD saw the rise in St. John's River, so they move up to areas by the Wilberforce Cemetery, behind the tire shop, although the work area remained behind Jimmy Tire Shop. And the river used to be going in, well, it had two prongs, so we did not have that kind of buildup. And it's likewise like here, we're having constant flooding because, yes, we're developing, but we are not doing things to maybe constantly getting things going. Yeah? So we are flooding here because we're feeling the sea here, and we have not really done the engineering properly. So we have been doing a number of things. Dr. Williams going up to Grenada tonight. Went church in 1910. She's not in Grenville. She's still in St. George's. But the boundary you'll see up there say Grenville. There are a number of things. Grenada, the lake. What is happening around that place? Who is regulating? Even companies like even NAWASA, from an environmental standpoint, from a biodiversity standpoint, there are a number of things happening which we should, as a nation, try to address. So the Bar Association, I believe, is in a good position, maybe to help government with a legislative agenda. Because, all right, Dr. Spencer talked about 1833, but this guy gave us some information there. But we know that in 1835, the plan was to lay at least 4 standpipes into St. George. It took 46 years from taking the water from the back of Tempe by Fortune Foods into town. Let's fast forward. Grenada said, oh, we are going to protect a number of percentage of our terrestrial and marine. Again, legislative. To date, I don't know whether, well, I'm not a maths man, whether I should go beyond 0, minus, or in front. So maybe if you go in front, you might speak about grandans. But have we put in place managerial and legislative? We're hearing about, carriacou, we have scuba diving, we have this on water sculpture park. Have we declared the NPA? Carriacou is important internationally. It's a priority internationally. Grenada, it is extremely low. And there are a number of things. And I think that if we work together, if we get the Bar Association to tell government, hey, look, there are things that you are doing. You are not building the appropriate institutions. We cannot get monies because we don't have institution in place. One person is not an institution, not a unit. And once we don't do those things, then let us maybe put a cap on COP. So we have a homework to do. I think that we should start tomorrow. Get the Bar Association. It's a legal issue to assist us.
I cannot respond to this one. But I have to agree that where do we go from here? I think education and awareness will be critical. I think we have to put ourselves in the front line of knowing exactly what is happening with our economies and our people and our environment. We have to look out for what we might call the FIC, out there in terms of what climate is doing for us. We recognize, remember that I mentioned the debate on smoking. And for years, they were telling people that it's good for your health until eventually the cigarette has to have the Surgeon General warning on it. It took years for that to happen. So I believe we cannot let the same happen. No, we need to educate ourselves on climate. We need to contribute to the transition to a low economy. And then we have to watch our behavior and make sure that our behavior is consistent with the issues relating to environmental stewardship and management.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Spencer. I heard you loud and clear when you said that we needed to be at the table, otherwise we would end up on the menu. But as we approach COP30 and ambition tends to be decreasing, do you think it's time for us to get more aggressive? To perhaps, instead of focusing our energies on the climate negotiations, focus on strategic climate litigation at a CARICOM level or at an EOSIS level? So I just wanted to get more of your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think aggression will, well, maybe not aggression, but I think the issue has to be, it will end up in court actions. I think we have seen the trend already. And that's why I'm saying that in the future we will have more of that kind. And maybe that's where the changes will take place. COP30 is in Brazil. They have a progressive leader in terms of environmental issues, but there is also a very strong fossil fuel lobby in Brazil. So we might have a continuation of the same kinds of issues. So I think if the negotiation, of which of course I'm part of, is not going to provide for all of us, I think we have to use all fronts, including the international and domestic courts, and be aggressive in that way, for the use of your word, to really get some movement in that direction. Because the climate deniers will be very aggressive. We have already heard the new Secretary for Energy from the US indicating very clearly the role that they're going to play. And I believe Trump 2 phenomena might be even more aggressive than Trump 1 phenomena. So I think we will have to prepare ourselves for that.
Anyone else? Yes. Okay, I see two people.
Good night.
Sir Lawrence, you first?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you, Dr. Spencer, for your very interesting talk. I've learned a lot. One question I would like to ask is this. How effective do you think the use of electrical energy, especially for machines and vehicles, how effective that would be for curtailing the greenhouse gases that we have? And incidentally, perhaps the next time you're all thinking about going to a country for your debate, don't choose a country like Baku. In Grenada, we have a very... I've said enough.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, all. Dr. Spencer, you talked a lot about the fossil fuel aspect and indicating that much was not achieved at Baku in terms of, particularly in regards to transitioning from fossil fuel into green energy. You also mention the situation with small island developing states and mention Grenada in terms of what's the news we've been hearing locally and internationally about contracts and so on to exploit Grenada's fossil fuel. Would you advise on this? Do you see any contradiction in terms of small island developing states as we proceed in future COP conferences? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this last question, Byron. I knew it was going to come. But just to go back, I think Baku, we have a really different communication on Baku, but we try not to remember, to forget it when we occurs there. We try not to bring that in the equation. On the issue, we have our NDC, Nationally Determined Contributions in Grenada. We are focused on 5 sectors. Those sectors we felt had the greatest potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and they were the energy sector, the transport sector, also the industrial sector, air conditioning and so on. We also had the waste sector and also the forestry sector. These were the 4. But the greatest pollution comes from the energy sector and the transport sector. So the question is, what impact will that make? I understand that we have over 60,000, maybe 65,000 vehicles on the island at the moment, 64, 65,000 thereabout. When you take off the very young, the people who can't have a license, and the very old, like me, who can't drive, then you might have 1 vehicle per person in Grenada, and it is growing. And it is ICE vehicles in the main, because the penetration of hybrids and electric vehicles is very small at the moment. So again, this is an area, a significant area. I think the government, through the Ministry of Transport, is actively looking at that issue. And there is a project now, my understanding, e-mobility project, which will define the policies clear as we go forward in terms of how we move to deal with the issues of mobile e-mobility in Grenada. So this is something hot on the table. Again, there is some fiscal incentives available for the importation of hybrids and electric vehicles. And I think there might be maybe future legislation to curb the importation of all ICE vehicles. So this is basically all I can say at the moment. It is an important sector in Grenada's total emissions, together with the energy sector. They account for almost 90% of the GHG emissions in Grenada. Of course, we are doing our what we call the NDC 3.0, and NDC is Nationally Determined Contributions. So, NDC 3.0, we're doing that in Grenada now, so that's why I think it's important. I think there will be consultations to ensure that the information comes from deep within the bowels of the Grenadian people. I think that is quite important as we go forward. I think we need to change the dynamics to ensure that whatever we do comes from deep within the sinews of the Grenadian population. Brother Byron, I think I sort of alluded to the fact on the issue when I said that the Honorable Prime Minister of Barbados said it was a difficult conversation. And the issues relating to whether or not small island states should be involved in the fossil fuel exploration business has a lot to do with, in my view, fulfilling obligations in the other 16 Sustainable Development Goals. That's one point. The second point is, as indicated, even within the convention itself, the issue of eradication of poverty and sustainable development is sacrosanct, even within the context of the Climate Change Convention. As I again also indicated, there is an issue which comes from small island states and other countries from developing world, which says that developed world, you have already done all your pollution. You shouldn't do any more. You should be curbing. Whatever left for GHG emissions should come from us, not from you. It's basically what they're saying. And then we could extend that within developing countries and say, okay, you large developing countries, like China and India, leave that space for us as small island developing states and least developed countries so that we can achieve sustainable development. This is, maybe that is another issue. At the same time, we have seen that there are issues relating to living the black hole, what they call it, or the gift from God in the soil, and being paid by developed countries to keep it there. And that has not proven to be quite lucrative or enough for small island developing states. We see the situation with Guyana and the forest and how difficult it was for them to really maintain that regime in terms of the requirements from the developed countries to ensure that those issues remain advantageous to the countries. And what we've noticed, and clearly that came out very clearly in the debates, that access for small island developing states to attract and to access these issues have been very, very difficult and costly. So, in my view, a difficult conversation. As the economists say, it is a wicked problem, but you have to take all the issues into the decision-making space, and then you will have to defend your people and your economy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas. We will now take our last question. There's an eager gentleman.
Not too eager. Good evening, everyone. Lancelot Garraway, and I'm also retired. One observation and one question. The observation is that seems it's for the last 175 years we've been talking about climate change. Perhaps that terminology has worn out, and perhaps we should look at a new terminology that may attract younger people and that may give some more impetus for us to take action. The question I have is in regards to carbon trading. You touched on it a little with Guyana, but when that issue was raised, it seemed to be one of the avenues that would spur this whole climate attack and reduction. Can you just enlighten us as to what has transpired in that field and if in fact it's still a viable option?
Thank you very much. I think in terms of the change in the narrative, I believe the new issues could be climate justice. This is where we're going. And in this forum, I believe the issues relating to preparedness on the legal and the judiciary for the issues of climate change will be critical because we are moving into that space. And we will move faster as the countries move to the right. And as the climate deniers get more bold and brave, we will move into that space. You raised the issue of carbon trading. Of course, that is part of the negotiations that we are for small island developing states. Well, I am one of those also who don't believe that this will be the panacea for us in terms of addressing the issue relating to climate change. What we see at the moment in terms of climate finance is not through the carbon trading system. What we see is grant financing from developed to developing countries to address the issue of climate adaptation in particular and loss and damage, and to ensure that the funds are agile enough when needed that can be accessed on very minimal terms and conditions, ensuring that they are grant basis and must be addressed, be able to be accessed immediately upon these disasters and upon issues relating to loss and damage. So carbon trading, yes, there are issues here, but there are also issues relating to the fairness of carbon trading and the capacity for small island developing states to play in that market. We don't have the capacity to play in that market. We've never played in the market, in the carbon trading market very effectively over the period. In the negotiation in COP29, we had agreement on the issue, what we call the article. My understanding I should stay away from the complexities. What we have cooperative approaches, Article 6 relating to carbon market, and there are 3 major issues here. One is a structured carbon market, which we call 6.4, a voluntary carbon market, which we call 6.2, and 6.8, which is non-market approaches. All of these were part of the negotiation in COP29. It took several years, maybe about 8 years, for us to agree on a slew of issues relating to carbon market. But critically, I think I want to stop on this one. What we have going on here is, we call it the CBAM. In the Europe, for instance, they are indicating that if you are importing anything into our country, it must pass a carbon test. And if it does not have the carbon test, it's going to cost you more. So it's like a border adjustment mechanism. I don't want to get into the technical areas, but what it makes is exports from certain places will be more expensive. And these are the issues that will be part of the negotiation as we're going forward. We have seen issues relating to universal coercive measures now into the equation, and all of these issues, legal issues, are creeping into the climate negotiations as we speak. So we have seen, for instance, CBAM, which is this border adjustment mechanism, carbon border adjustment mechanism, in place right now in some countries, are about to be placed in some countries. The same free trade that they use to destroy the banana industry in our region is the same trade that is used now to put barriers for goods going into with high carbon intent into those countries. So what we see is the hypocrisy of the whole international system in terms of how we address. That's the reason why I'm saying that as small states, we have to be on the table, on the fight, so that we're not in the menu. Thank you.
At this time, we will ask the member of the Grenada Bar Association, one of our very newly minted attorneys, Mr. Trevon St. Bernard, to come up to the podium and render his vote of thanks to our esteemed guest speaker, Dr. Spencer.
And followed by him, we will ask Ms. Natifa Francis to make herself available.
Good evening, everyone. I adopt the protocol earlier established. As we draw this 20th edition of the Sir Archibald Nedd Memorial Lecture Series to a close, it is my great honor to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the Grenada Bar Association, the host of this prestigious event. First and foremost, I extend a heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guest speaker, Dr. Spencer Thomas, for providing us with some serious food for thought. This year's topic was indeed a timely one, and we appreciate your assistance in putting our future as a small island state into perspective. We are deeply grateful to our sponsors, Netherlands Insurance and Huggins Grenada, for partnering with us to host this year's lecture. We thank you for your generous support. Your contributions have been instrumental in making this event possible and successful. To the organizing team and volunteers, thank you for your meticulous planning and hard work. Your efforts behind the scenes have ensured that everything ran smoothly and that today's lecture was a resounding success. We also extend our appreciation to the media and publicity team at TNR Communications for spreading the word about this lecture series and helping us reach a wider audience. Your efforts have played a crucial role in the success of this event. A big thank you to the technical support team and Grenada Trade Center staff for ensuring everything went out without a hitch. Special mention to Ms. Liza Bido for your excellent assistance in liaising with the Grenada Bar Association executive to ensure that the venue was properly organized for today's lecture. Your professionalism and attention to detail have greatly contributed to the overall experience. Thank you to Mr. Damani Brazan for the beautiful decorations for tonight's lecture. And we thank the caterer, Tropical Catering Services in advance for the delicious refreshments to come. Finally, a heartfelt thanks to our attendees. Your presence and enthusiasm have made this event truly special. Your support for a discussion on this very important topic is noted with much thanks, and we appreciate your engagement in today's discussions, which has been wonderful to witness. In conclusion, thank you all once again for your invaluable contributions and participation. You have made this 20th Sir Archibald Nedd Lecture a memorable and inspiring occasion. Have a wonderful evening and safe travels home. Thank you.
We now invite Ms. Natifa Francis to the stage to present a token to Dr. Spencer Thomas.
On behalf of the Grenada Bar Association, I express a profound gratitude for your acceptance of our invitation to present tonight's lecture. It was indeed thought-provoking and enlightening. Thank you.
Good night, all. Those of you who have attended in person, and of course, those of you who have joined us online.
Now, this brings us to the end of tonight's show. As my good co-moderator, well, sorry, it was a good show. Yes. Now, we invite you guys, I know during Mr. St. Bernard's vote of thanks, the only thing that stood out were the caterers. But we wish you all the best, safe travels home. But before you do that, please join us at the back and enjoy the refreshments that we have prepared for you. Have a pleasant night to everyone. Thank you.